Hey everyone, this is Jacob from the future. As it turns out, my audio from this entire episode was incredibly clipped because of the gain I set on my microphone. Now, I didn't realize this until after the episode was done, and I asked Alex, hey, did you notice my audio was clipping? And he said, no. And then I listened back to the recording, and I'll roll the clip.
I'm just about to introduce him. Here's a little pause point. Jacob, I'm actually noticing a lot of feedback or static from your mic. Steve, are you hearing that?
I'm not, no.
You're not? Okay, it could totally just be my speaker, so ignore that and we'll keep going.
As a result, it's almost unlistenable in its original state. So you might notice a few odd audio transition points where the audio cuts out or does something weird. Well, we're still learning how to podcast, and I apologize. I used an audio plugin to do most of the declipping. That audio plugin was $130, which I was not willing to pay. So there are some watermarks and stuff like that I had to get rid of. And because I feel bad about not supporting the folks who built said audio plugin, I'm going to let them have a little ad spot here, and then we'll jump right into our episode.
This sound is processed by Stereo Tool. Go to stereotool.com.
Yeah.
Hey everyone, and welcome to the unofficial Unreal Engine podcast, where we talk about Unreal Engine and green screened chairs. We're your hosts, Jacob and Alex.
Before we get started, make sure you like and subscribe, rate, whatever it is, wherever you're listening and watching. It helps us a lot. And with that, we'll get right into it. You know, we'd like to do a little kind of word association, a little fun, with folks who come on the show. So I'm just going to say some words, and you're just going to, fire right back at us the first thing that comes to your head, all right? That sound good?
I think so.
We intentionally don't want people to know who you are yet. This is not
great.
Introduce
Great.
yourself.
I love it.
Everyone's going to judge you for this, and then they're going to stop listening, and, that's how we do it here.
All right.
Home.
Kansas.
Work.
Home.
Food.
Tacos.
Nice. Travel.
COVID.
Drink.
Gin.
Virtual production.
Yes.
Unreal Engine.
Fun.
Okay. And a few follow-up questions. How do you take your coffee, Steve?
I prefer lattes these days. I'm one of those people who has like one of those ridiculous at-home coffee machines now due to COVID and working from home. So I would say plentiful. And often.
That's a good answer. All right. What's your favorite time of day?
Definitely evening. Yeah, I'm definitely not a morning person, as evidenced by the coffee.
Yeah, that's a fair assumption. Okay, and then what was the last thing that you really laughed at? Like, what was something funny that happened recently?
I have a 2.5-year-old. He's been really into trucks and trains recently, and he recently saw my demo reel, and he looks at it, and I mean, he's not, like amazed by digital technology or anything, but he watched it, and then he just looked at me and said, "It needs more trucks." I was like, "Oh, thanks, buddy."
That's great.
That's fantastic.
Well, awesome. So, Alex, would you like to introduce our guest?
Absolutely. Steve, very excited to have you on the podcast. I've known you for a few years now. We've never met in person. This might be the second time we've ever had a video view of each other, but I'd love for you to take a moment to introduce yourself to our audience, a little bit about who you are, where you come from, and maybe why you might be here.
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, everybody. I'm Steve Beigun. I'm a Unreal developer, senior tech artist, currently at Framestore, which is in New York. So next time I'm there, we'll have to meet up. Yeah, I've been using Unreal for about 5 years. I've been all around doing virtual production, experience design, architecture visualization, VR. I've done a lot of like mentoring and education. Taught at the Kansas City Art Institute as an adjunct for Unreal, CG Spectrum mentor, authorized instructor, all sorts of things. Before that, I was in motion design. That's a whole nother topic. But yeah, I've been doing this for a while. Always happy to talk about it and share my experience with people.
Yeah, welcome to the show, Steve. And speaking of sharing your experience, how did you first come to hear about Unreal Engine? What were your first steps into it like? Tell us a little about that.
Yeah. So back when I was a motion designer here in Kansas City, I was mostly freelance, but I was bad. I just wasn't good at it at all. So I mean, more accurately, I'd say I was just professionally unemployed for a large part of it. And I was always looking for like the next like thing that I could kind of latch onto. And I was early in my career, like, oh, maybe I'll get into 3D, maybe I'll get into like animation, something like that. Around that time, 360 video was starting to get really popular. And at the same time, Hover Junkers by Stress Level Zero was in production. And I thought that looked like super cool. And just like the marketing for it and the idea of like being in a headset and being able to walk around was just wild to me. And I thought like, that's so expensive. I'm never going to be able to like even see a VR headset like in my lifetime. And then a friend of mine told me that a company here in Kansas City was doing stuff with VR for architecture. And I was like, okay, that sounds cool. I'll definitely have to check it out. So I cold called this company, Pulse Design Group, a healthcare design firm here. Really small place, but they do like some really big healthcare projects. I just talked to them and I said, hey, I want to see what VR is like. Can I just like come say hi sometime? So they let me come in for a tour, and I tried on a DK1, and my first experience was just like earth shattering. I was like, oh my gosh, this looks so realistic, and you know, it's like I'm there, you know, that whole thing. So that evening I went home and downloaded Unreal, and the next day they called me back and said the person who was in charge of their VR stuff was already like, they'd already put in their 2 weeks notice. So are you looking for a job? Because you're the only person we've ever talked to who's interested in this stuff. So I got immensely lucky, and I was there for a few years, and yeah, it was just no turning back. I've never felt the need to go back into motion design, anything like that.
Can we just clarify? So you had Unreal downloaded for one day and then took a job working in Unreal?
I got so lucky, man. Like I also looked at Unity very briefly, and it was kind of like a toss up. Like, I mean, everyone's using Unity these days. This was like right after Unreal went free. So most of that was like 2015, 2016, something like that. Yeah. So most of the people doing VR stuff were obviously in Unity already. So that was like kind of a toss up for me, but the studio was using Unreal because that meshed better with ArcViz. So that's what pushed me in that direction.
That's amazing. So for folks out there who maybe are interested in getting a job working in Unreal Engine, or maybe they're interested in it, would your advice be fake it till you make it? Or, you know, what's your advice for someone who's out there and maybe just saw some earth-shattering experience, or like, I want to do this? Like, what is that, you know, first piece of advice?
My first piece of advice would be, don't get your advice from me, because I know it. I'm a privileged, you know, middle-class white guy who's had every opportunity in the world. That being said, yeah, fake it till you make it. And if you can't fake it, faking it till you make it. And you know, figure it out as you go. And like, if you see the stuff you want to learn, like, figure it out. Half of tech art is just being resourceful and clever. And, you know, making it work one way or another.
Right.
Other than that, yeah, your community is always your biggest resource. No great digital work ever happens in a vacuum. You know, like you got to surround yourself with people who are also really excited about tech, people who are really talented, who want to, you know, make some cool things. Yeah, and hopefully you can run into other people who have a need like I did.
So
Right place, right time.
yeah, you mentioned tech art. Can you explain to folks listening or watching what it is a tech artist does? Like, what does that mean?
Yeah, so before being a tech artist, I refer to myself as a creative technologist, which both are extremely vague.
It usually means you're doing like 3 jobs and getting paid for one, as far as I can tell, but yeah.
I won't say you're wrong. Yeah, so tech artists, in my experience, they tend to fall into one of two camps. Either you are like sort of a pipeline engineer, you're a coder, you know blueprints, you're familiar with like Perforce, admin, things like that. And you can also like make custom tools in Unreal, like that kind of Unreal stuff. The other kind of tech artist is more like procedural shaders, you know, spend all time in like the material editor. Maybe they can like do like really good lighting, things like that. That is more the camp that I'm in. I tend to, yeah, it's kind of like being just a generalist, but more focused on coding would be a good way to put it. And it really just varies from industry to industry and from one studio to another. Like virtual production studios, a tech artist is going to be probably spending most of their time on like optimization and making a, you know, 200 million poly scene run at more than 2 frames per second. Whereas with like automotive, a tech artist is probably more focused on like pipeline stuff and also optimization.
Can't
Less
quite get
so
away from
nowadays, maybe in Unreal Engine
Yeah.
5.
Oh,
We'll see.
dude. Yeah, I hope so.
Yeah, don't we all? Right. So, how did you kind of land on tech art? Is that just because you started in VR and you gave us a list of maybe, I don't know, like a dozen things you did in the meantime? Like,
Yeah.
how did that happen?
Yeah. So I was at Pulse Design Group, and I promise I'll answer your question. It's just kind of like a story.
Well, that's the right kind
We'll get
of
there.
answer,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Yeah. So I started there in like 2015 and worked on ArcViz stuff for a while. Rick Embers was the principal who was kind of in charge with the VR division, and he really saw like the potential and the opportunity for the tech. Like VR is so much more than, you know, just seeing an operating theater. Like we can actually use this to make design decisions and things like that. So he really helped push the studio in that direction with the VR team, which was really great. And we scaled up to 3 people on my team. And then we actually got into medical simulation. So working with some enterprise companies doing like tours of hospitals, or in one case, a heart surgery training system in Vive Pro, which was absolutely wild. I can come back to that, but yeah, it went from ArcViz to like actual like pseudo game dev kind of stuff. And then from there, I got a job at Dimensional Innovations, which is a experience design firm here in Kansas City. And that was way more like generalist sort of role, creative technologist, you know? And then sometime, this was probably a little bit more than a year ago, I saw this company called Happy Mushroom that got big because they worked on the environments for Mandalorian for the volume. So I, same as how I got my first job, I reached out to the CEO of the company, and I was just like, hey, we've never met each other, but your work's pretty rad. Can we like talk about it sometime? And lo and behold, he responded and then messaged me back and was like, hey, are you looking for a job by any chance? Because we need tech artists. And I'm like, well, I may be. So So it was more just like I had the experience to fit into that role. And if someone wants to call me a tech artist for doing the stuff I'm already doing, sure, that's the role you have on your team. And now that I've had that experience, it seems like every studio out there is just desperate for tech artists. I think part of that is because tech artists wear a lot of hats, like we were saying.
And when you don't know how to solve a problem, you look for whoever can do that, right? I mean, I've always thought about tech art for me has always been like when I first got into Unreal, I was always, thinking about, oh, I want to build this, this, and this, like in terms of like an experience, like, oh, I want to make a game, or I want to make, I don't know, an architectural experience, whatever it is. And then I always end up being more interested in like mastering a material or like creating some cool tool. Like that's how I kind of got into a lot of the stuff I do today. But I remember watching a video by Ryan Brooks, who's on the Epic team, and I remember watching a video. I think it was like his video on rain-marched clouds and fog that he did, and he classic Ryan Brooks shows up in like the Hawaiian shirt. I would love to have Ryan Brooks on this podcast, by the way.
All hail Ryan Brooks.
Ryan Brooks, please come on. The classic Hawaiian shirt, and he's just going on about like, he's just going so much deeper than I thought you could go with Unreal, and I was like, wow, that's cool. That's like, I would love to do that. That sounds awesome. And then you also see lots of tech artists who do totally different things. So it's pretty broad, but it's also like, I mean, it's also always been for me also part of what I've been very interested in with Unreal is like mastering those little subsystems, being a power user, and like the material editor is a job, as it turns out, right? Like, I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah, it is so much fun, and it's always something different. And if anyone is interested in becoming a tech artist and like finding like a really awesome job very quickly out of school, like there are so many great resources for learning. Obviously, I'd recommend William Fauche's YouTube series for learning Unreal. Totally awesome stuff. Clinton Jones Punisher on YouTube has really awesome stuff where he's learning Unreal all the time. Yep. I think there's like tons of really great blogs out there. Twitter is honestly like my best resource for tech art right now. Some really awesome people to follow, and everyone's just like so awesome, and like everyone's really cool about sharing their work and their resources. Yeah.
Do you have any like folks you'd like to call out on Twitter for someone who just did something super cool that you're like, wow, that is awesome?
Yes, I do. So the thing I'm going to show later on is directly from I know I'm going to butcher this, I'm so sorry, but Tazid Korambale, I believe is how it's pronounced. He's a tech artist at Epic. I believe he's on the Fortnite team, but he used to have a blog for tech art, and he showed some tutorials for how to make some really awesome procedural and animated shaders. And I went through that blog and I did every single one of his tutorials, recreated them for myself, and like learned as much as I could from it. His blog is now offline, so if you're listening to this and you're looking for it, it's not there. Please bring it back online because I have questions. But like all of that stuff has been like in my personal asset library as like stuff I've learned and collected over time. And the stuff that I'm gonna be showing later like is directly from like that learning experience. So people like him, like I wouldn't be where I am as a tech artist without that kind of help. That's awesome. Super big thank you. Yeah, and there's countless people out there who are just like posting just awesome stuff just every day. It's kind of intimidating.
Every once in a while, yeah, you see someone who's just like doing something crazy. I remember I saw on Twitter Asher Zoo, I want to say is his name. He goes on Twitter, who's doing all the fluid simulations in Niagara. Like, holy crap! Like that is some. He was like day one making fluid sims, real-time fluid sims that looked incredible. And man, I was so jealous. Like I was like, I wish I could do that. Like that would be the coolest thing ever.
Yeah, I think at Epic he was responsible for a lot of the cloud sims for the Unreal 5 demo, Valley of the Ancients. Yeah.
That does
really cool stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
It feels a bit to me like the arc of diving into Unreal Engine is at first it seems very intimidating. Oh my God, how do you get started? Then you might get into a bit of a rhythm and you're like, hey, I'm pretty good at some stuff. I can make something look pretty cool. But then the deeper you go, the more you realize how endless of a journey it can be. And it becomes this thing where the more you know, the more you realize how much there is you don't know. So when we talk about getting into the world of Unreal Engine and everything Steve's covered so far, one thing I'm curious to ask you, Steve, is how did you also make the transition from saying, I feel comfortable with the things I can do in Unreal Engine, to also saying, I feel comfortable teaching other people how to do things in Unreal Engine? And so we segue a little bit into your journey into creating courses as part of Unreal Online Learning, and then also becoming an authorized instructor.
Yeah, that's a really great question. So one thing I learned from that heart surgery team that I was working with, that training team at this medical company really kept reinforcing that when it comes to medical training, their practice is, what was it? It was like watch once, do once, teach once. And that's how you reinforce learning. Like you have to observe someone doing it, you have to do it yourself under supervision, and then teach it to someone else, and it just reinforces it in your mind. So that kind of stuck with me. And I was thinking like, yeah, I can do like this ArcViz stuff all day. Like, it's, importing Revit models and optimizing stuff here and there. But I'm not actually going to like cement it in my mind unless I like make YouTube videos and show my process. And who's Unreal Lighting Academy? I forget his name, but there's a really awesome YouTube series from this guy. He was at DICE. He's been like at all these really awesome studios out in Europe. He had like long form tutorials, very much showing the process, and when something wouldn't work, he'd kind of like talk through it and be like, oh, okay, well, this didn't work because this happened, and maybe we should try this instead of this, instead of like editing everything together like nice and clean. So I tried making some videos like that, showing the process, and it was really awesome. Like I had a bunch of views for a few videos, and it did help me learn things and become more comfortable teaching and at my own pace, and then hearing myself and editing it after the fact. And then from there, Joe Raddick, a friend of mine, was working with the education team for online learning. He said they were looking for authors, and I said, sign me up, because that sounds awesome. I'd love to help out. It was definitely something I wasn't comfortable with yet, but something I knew like I'm not going to get comfortable with it unless I do it. So I worked with Jenny O'Connor and Joe, and we worked with a really awesome architect, actually from Pulse Design Group, Callum Viertaler, who designed a house in Revit that was then used for architecture training projects for online learning. So did
for
that
anyone
for a
wondering,
while.
I believe we refer to this now as the Epic House.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's cool that it like still exists for tutorials and stuff. It's really awesome. So I did online learning for a little while, and then probably about a year and a half ago, I heard about this authorized instructor program. Obviously I had to sign up for it. If nothing else, getting the little badge in my email is going to be cool. So yeah, I did that, did the whole training thing. It was during COVID, so like we didn't have to do things in person. We just like did video calls and everything. That went really well, got authorized. I have yet to have any requests to do any training for anyone anywhere. I'm glad I'm authorized as an instructor. I would be happy and excited to utilize that if ever needed, but now I also have 2 kids, and my time is very spare. So yeah, I did that, and along the way, the Art Institute here in town really wanted to start teaching VR development. So being one of those resources here in town, and I had also been the organizer for one of the organizers for the Kansas City VR meetup group for a few years, and also for the Unreal user group. It was just like a natural fit. Like if they're going to be teaching this stuff, like I will be there to make sure it's taught right, kind of thing. So did that, and yeah, it's been really great to help people learn, and it's really helped me learn like the things that I need to focus more on, specifically like the basics of like what shaders are and textures and how things need to be imported, especially from other programs that are weird like Rhino. So that's been a lot of fun, and it's been really advantageous for me too.
Steve, what's a random, let's say, hashtag UE tip that you've encountered recently where you couldn't believe that you hadn't done that before?
Just one.
Here, I'll give you a moment to think. Something that
Yeah.
I found out this week that blew my mind was over the past year, I've started using the event track in Sequencer quite a bit, because the event track lets you actually make things happen inside blueprints from the sequencer. So you can be playing along animation, then, you know, initiate something crazy happening inside of a blueprint. And I didn't know until this week that event track can actually be essentially a child of a particular track in the sequencer. So the particular example I was using it for this week was actually rebinding all these elements that were in the sequencer so that they could work with things that were spawned in the scene that the sequencer didn't know anything about. And that was incredibly useful and is now saving me a ton of work for elements where I realized, like, I don't know what is going to be happening in the scene in this particular moment in 20 minutes. But I'm going to have some kind of workaround to have things still play through sequencer with parent-child relationships. Being able to have an event track that is actually directly connected to something with rebinding as part of that is super useful.
Didn't you say you also found like some secret event naming thing recently? Who was it who told me this? That it's like there's a thing where, you know, you expose an event tick to sequencer, right?
Mm-hmm.
The idea is like if you have some blueprint value that needs to be updated with every like sequencer update. But there's, oh man, now I'm gonna like leave this on a cliffhanger. There's this if you name an event a specific name, it is just automatically called. And I did not know this, and then someone told me that. I thought it was Alex. I'm gonna go and have to like retry this and figure out what this name is, but I found that recently, and I thought it was you, Alex. But
I don't know. I mean, the closest to that I might have mentioned is being able to hit the checkbox for call in editor, which is super useful because
call in editor
can
is
be used anytime.
An underrated checkbox. Like we should have a ranking of checkboxes right now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Here's a thought. So when I was at Happy Mushroom, I worked on this Netflix show called, which is all done in Unreal, super awesome, really, really cool. And everything was done in sequencer, right? So one thing I learned that kind of blew my mind, instead of triggering effects that are already in the scene, you can just add them directly to sequencer to fire them there. So for example, if you wanted like a smoke plume to start at frame 53 or something, you don't put it in your outliner and then like toggle the visibility at frame 53. You would drag it directly into the sequencer and then tell it when to activate. So it's not like living in your world just like invisibly until a certain point. Blew my mind, especially when you're working with like Perforce, and like that would otherwise mean you have to check out the level and like change the level design.
Good
like
point.
big no. Yeah. So do as much in sequencer as you can. Don't try to fake it if you don't need to.
Yeah, and that becomes nice and modular as well, because the more things you have spawned directly from sequencer, the more that you can actually take that sequence and put it in other levels. Whereas if you have something that's in the level and you need to possess it from sequencer, then you're creating this very strict relationship. And if you now want to use that sequencer in a different level, you need to rebind it, and that becomes a bit of a nightmare. So absolutely, for the sake of keeping your level clean, for not dealing with checking things out, spawn as much as possible directly from sequencer.
And the terminology there is inside a sequencer, you know, you can select an asset and you can convert to spawnable, but what's the other type? It's like
Possessable.
Possessable, right? Okay, so if you drop something into your scene and you click it and then you go into sequencer and you say add to sequencer, it's gonna just make it possessable, meaning, you know, it like sequencer can take control of that object, while it's running. And then there is a little drop down. I think it's like the upper left-hand corner sequencer that's like convert it to spawnable, and that's going to remove it from your level and check and add it to your sequencer or your level sequence, right? That's the reason why it's called a level sequence, right? Is because like levels contain actors, and as it turns out, so can sequencer.
Yeah, and the tip Steve was describing basically allows you to bypass the part where the thing ever had to exist in your level at all. You can drag things directly into sequencer that weren't even in your level, and it's automatically going to be something that is considered spawning from there. In fact, anytime you hit the little camera icon in sequencer, you are spawning cameras that only exist in the sequencer. As soon as you close the sequencer, those cameras go away.
Yeah, and it's pretty cool because you can't really do that in like most animation pipelines. Like you can't do spawnables, right? Like that, there's no idea of like a runtime, so to speak. It's more of like each frame has some state that you're assigning actions to. So it's a pretty unique feature of Unreal as far as I know. But for folks who have not even dug into sequencer, it's really worth your time, even just so that you can do what I do and solve too many problems with Unreal Engine, where it's like, oh, I got to render an intro to a podcast. Why don't I do it in Unreal? Which is exactly what we did for this podcast, because I'm like, I don't know. Like, yes, I could like mess around in Maya or Houdini for like a day, or I could spend 30 minutes in Unreal and get something that, looks pretty nice.
Agreed. Well, as long as we're talking about tips, Steve, I heard that there was a little thing you might want to share with the class today.
Yeah, I got a little thingy. Let me show you. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
So this is not an environment I made. This was free content. This is Epic Bike. I did not make that, but I did make this fancy effect. So what's happening here is we're getting essentially an animated wipe based on the position of a blueprint, and we're driving a material parameter collection to make this happen. So I'll kind of walk you through how this works. And for those just listening to this, you'll just have to imagine we see a really fancy bike with just the coolest animated shader you've ever seen in your life. And
yeah, it's like a dissolve. We have to add some color commentary, right? Like, okay, it's a wet street at night with a motorcycle in like what looks like a Japanese city. We got to add more detail here, guys.
Yeah. I would compare the effect to if you've watched the show Loki.
Yeah.
I think there's this effect at some point where like someone does this cool like sci-fi grenade explosion thing, and it makes like a vicinity like evaporate, kind of similar to that, or almost like the Thanos snap effect if we were to add like some smoky particles off of this and like dump the glow. So I'll walk you through how to set this up. It's like a pretty basic basis of how this works. We're going to touch on material parameter collections, the simplest blueprint you've ever seen in your life, and just how to make this mask in a material. All good?
Teach us.
All right. So first and foremost, we need to make a material parameter collection. These are where you would just make a material, and all it is just a collection of parameters, scalar and vector. And this can be really helpful for cases where you need to reference a value multiple places throughout a scene, right? So we could make a parameter here and call it like, I don't know, light glow amount or something, and we can reference that around like all of the different kinds of lights in our world, something like that. We can add vector parameters that could be like different colors. This has been really helpful for like architecture stuff where you want all of the walls to match like a certain thing, or like if you're doing something you're trying to match like branded stuff, this would be a really great place to unify that, because then you can just change it here and it changes it universally wherever that thing is referenced, right? So all I did is I made a vector parameter and I called it location. And that is it in here. That is all we need in the material parameter collection. After that, I made a simple blueprint, just an actor. I called it like BP white animation or something really complex. And then think about how a blueprint is structured, right? It can hold three different kinds of things. It can hold data, right, in the forms of variables, whether it's just a value or like a Boolean, whatever, something like that. Components, whether it's geometry, lights, collision boxes, AI stuff, weird things like that, or logic. All we're going to use this for is that logic. And we're going to jump into the construction script here. And this fires every time this blueprint is updated in the viewport. So anytime that is moved, if it's spawned, something like that. One caveat here, if we're going to try to like animate this effect in Sequencer, we'd actually want to do this logic in the event graph on tick, or just not use this blueprint at all. But for now, we're going to make this, we're going to do set vector parameter value. And then we would choose the material parameter collection we're looking at and the parameter name, which should be location. And then we want to get world location of the default scene root, plug that into the parameter value. Boom. So all this is doing, anytime this blueprint is moved in the world, it's going to update that vector value to be the XYZ of where that thing is in the world, right? Pretty straightforward, and that can be used to drive any number of effects. So here I've used it for this cool animated wipe shader. You could also use it for like a localized black hole is kind of a cool thing I've done before, or like if you wanted to draw a gradient on like a variety of objects in your world that are like in this space, you can do something like that. Any questions before I hop into the material side of it?
Works great for me so far.
Awesome.
Pretty cool.
I don't hear any questions from the audience either, so I'm just
yeah, very quiet.
So in the material, I already have this set up, but I'll just kind of walk through it here. So first, you want to drag your material parameter collection into the editor. So I already did that, and I selected location. We want to mask just the red, green, and blue values because we don't want the fourth alpha value, because we're turning the RGB into XYZ essentially. We're subtracting that from absolute world position, which is probably one of my favorite nodes. This is a cool node that you can use to sample where a given point on an object is in 3D space. So if you wanted to, for example, make the tops of mountains white and make it look like snow, you could use a node like this. You could, gosh, I don't know.
And people don't really know about this input data node, and the fact that it is like there's so much cool stuff. If you hit that drop down on your left, like I just want to highlight this real quick. Like depending on what kind of shader or what kind of material you're using, like transparent, masked, etc., and also if you're using forward or deferred rendering, you get a bunch of awesome information here that not everyone knows exist. And in some cases, you get even more than this. For example, if you use like a post-processing material, you'll get all your depth, you'll get a ton of stuff, and you can do so many cool effects with just this one node. It's really quite cool.
Yeah.
And for the audience just listening in, so some of the options we have here are absolute world position, absolute world position excluding material shader offsets, camera relative world position including material shader offsets, and then the same but excluding.
Right. And if you, for example, turn it to a transparent material, you'll get, like I said, you'll get ambient occlusion, depth information, or you can. Actually, I don't know if it all comes in through this node, but you can get all that same information through a similar manner, and kind of supplementing your materials with like data from the rendering pipeline is kind of, in my opinion, one way that you kind of take your shader to the next level, in the sense that like you're kind of having your material interact with more in your scene, or maybe take into account information outside of itself.
Yeah, so similar node, but you're right. Like pulling like the normal information and using that in materials, you can get some wacky results very quickly. Yeah, I've also used this if you mask out the red and green channels and plug that into a texture, you can use this to make, for example, textures that tile based on where they are in the world instead of how big the object is. So if you plug that into a plane, you can make ceiling tiles that are actually scaled appropriately, and you can scale that plane without having to like go back in and like change the scale of the texture, things like that. This is a magical node. It's made my life so much easier. But in this case, all we're doing is we're setting this up so we're comparing the location of that blueprint to the world position of that object. Very simple, very straightforward. And then from there, we're plugging in that output of the component mask, the red, green, blue mask, to the A of a sphere mask. And all this does is it essentially creates a black and white mask where we can control the radius and the hardness and where it's located and how big it is. The B of this node is going to be absolute world position. Radius, for me, I have it plugged into some weird stuff with like time and math that we're not going to worry about right now. But like a good starting point would be like 100 for the radius, and this is in centimeters. And then hardness is 0 to 1. That's just going to be like the fall off of the sphere that you're making. Next, we need to plug the output of that sphere mask into the alpha of a lerp node. And the B of that lerp node is going to be the output of the subtract node that we made previously. So all this is going to give us is just a black and white gradient that we can throw on an object. And if we plugged this into the material, we'd see where the object is, where the blueprint is. Near that, it'll be white, and everything else will be black based on the proximity of that object. So from there, all I did to make this more snazzy was I added a few layers of noise on here. So as it blends in, we're getting like some chaotic nature to it. Cranked the emissive channel to give it some glow. Used time to make it fade in the future, or fade in the distance. And I can actually set it so it uses sine wave, so it just bounces back and forth, right? Added some color, and because this object is so complex, I have a few different material options. So there's like one that's blue, one that's yellow, one that's a little orange-ish, so we get like a really nice gradient in there. And then from there, it was just tweaking it until I got really bored of working on it anymore. And I can kind of show you all of the different parameters I have on here for art direction. It's pretty extensive. Wow. And I like to keep a lot of controls for art control and having like a really nice library of noise textures I can use and pull from, so I can see like, okay, maybe this would be cool, this would be cool.
So for those who are just listening, he just opened up his, material parameter, or his instance of the material, and there must be, like 50 different parameters in here. But that's pretty awesome. And this is a. Do you just take this from project to project, this base material?
I have a. You know how in the original Matrix film, there was that like white corridor when they're in the Matrix, the first time was like, I need guns or something. Yeah. And it, yeah. I basically have an Unreal environment that's like that, where I have it structured where like this area is materials, this one is animated effects, this one is avatars and characters. Wow. So I have a whole section of animated shaders like this one, and I have those master materials with 3 different options for them. So yeah, then I have a folder I set up in my personal asset library with tech art resources. That includes, I'll just show you.
Yeah. Oh, that'd be good.
I'm not just going to talk about it. Yeah. So I have tech art resources. This is stuff I found over time. There's a tech artist, Luos something. He's all over Twitter, has some really awesome tech art resource packs. So I have a few of his material functions here that have been really helpful. I have a whole selection of noise textures that have saved my butt more often than once, and a whole like nice variety, right? So you get like some nice normals. Yeah. You get some like ice, some electric kind of stuff, some sci-fi sorts of things. And then
before you leave that page, explain to people in general, like what noise is really good for when you're making materials.
Mhm.
Yeah. So noise is this texture right here that I've named T Perlin Noise M. That Perlin noise is used in about 99% of all visual effects for anything ever in the last 20 years. Noise is basically just a 2D image that helps drive randomness, whether it's grunge on an object or breaking up the edges of terrain or making landscape blend more smoothly between cobblestone and grass. Clouds use noise. Anything is going to use noise if it, is going to have any semblance of realism. It's really great to have a wide selection of these sorts of things. Like, yeah, Perlin noise, you could use this for like modulating the roughness of your chrome metal, right? Use that in like a subtle hint to like get some like a little bit of wear and tear on that. But then, hey, maybe you'd want like this. This kind of looks like a cellular globules. Maybe you'd use this for emulating pitting that would happen on like a stop sign over time, or from like hailstone, something like that. You have to think about like how these different things could be used, and if you have them readily available, then you can say, okay, well, in this circumstance, maybe I'd use this one a little bit easier and multiply this one against this one, or maybe fade this one back a little bit, and it could be a cool metallic channel, things like that. And then I have a few that are red, green, blue as well, so I can pull like one channel or two or whatever I need.
Yeah. Actually, Steve, can you also call out the fact that I don't know how many people know that you can have a single texture where you're actually using those RGB channels to have different kinds of data in them?
Oh.
We
So
got
like Alex said, you can have materials or textures with RGB and alpha, right?
Mhm.
So oftentimes, anytime you're using a diffuse or base color albedo texture, you're using all RG and B, right? But for roughness, for example, the roughness channel is only looking for a 0 to 1 value and a single 0 to 1 value. I don't think you get any different result if you give it RG and B. And if you did, it wouldn't be realistic at all. So if you were to plug in the RGB from your base color into roughness, it would just convert it to black and white. So what if you took your brick texture, for example, and pulled just the red value from that and plugged that into your roughness? That's all it needs, is a single 0 to 1 value. That means that your noise textures and any mask needs to be compressed differently, and they'll have different sizes accordingly. And then you can also stack them. So maybe your red channel can be your roughness, your green channel can be your ambient occlusion, your blue channel can be your metallic, something like that. Different programs have different ways that they compile them all together, and there's a lot of methodology about like which one's the best. Green. So yeah, if you're working on like a large project, especially with like a team or any like AAA production, you're going to want to bundle those together in a program like, Substance, or I think Quixel does it automatically. And yeah, you'll get more bang for your buck that way too.
I want to go on a very small side tangent here, because I think this is actually something interesting. This process, which I think is kind of sometimes referred to as, I guess, texture packing, or is actually really just a broader effect of how we now treat like images and GPUs. And because I'm a huge nerd, I think about this kind of stuff. But GPUs like were initially designed for games, right? Like they were designed to render images and rasterization and all this other stuff. But over time, people realized, oh, like a GPU is just a processor that takes data in like a very specific way, and in most ways, it's just textures, quote unquote, right? Like frame buffers, which are really, you have 4 channels and you have a spread out resolution, and you can encode as much data as you want into that and operate on it in parallel, right? Like that's what a GPU does. But it doesn't have to be an image. It doesn't have to be rasterized, which is like why you hear about things like compute shaders, or really like what CUDA is, for example. Like all CUDA is doing is like, well, CUDA is obviously way more advanced than anything like I could describe here. But like, all it's doing is like utilizing what was for games, right? And being clever about how it's like essentially packing information and operating on that information. And so, when we think about games, like I encourage you to think of a texture as just like some way of encoding data, because at the end of the day, like that is true. Like you can encode any information you want in a texture. Like for example, in Houdini, like if you bake out a simulation into, I believe they have like a simulation where you can bake it out into cards, like the labs tools, and it will bake essentially 3D points into a texture because you have 3 channels. So you have X, Y, Z. Like you can do anything with it really, and it's really pretty fascinating to see kind of how people have started to think about it.
You touched on something, Jacob, that I'd really like to poke at a little bit. You mentioned Houdini, and when we're talking about tech art, yeah,
I love Houdini.
If you want to be a tech artist, Houdini is, I can't understate how much value there is in that program right now. Like every studio I've talked to, like they are just so desperate for Houdini tech artists. And that means that there's a lot of value in that, and not enough people who know it. My friend David Olson told me if I learn Houdini, I'll be buying my second vacation home soon. So I've been trying to learn that. I've done like some basic introductory and like intermediate sort of things, some stuff that looks pretty cool, but like the advanced stuff, and man, if you can master Houdini, you can do anything.
I have always felt that if you have Unreal and Houdini, you can actually do,
you can conquer the world.
Like it's the problem is Houdini costs like $5,000 and Unreal is free. So obviously everyone's going to start out in there, but I think that like you're absolutely right. I mean, Houdini is incredible, and I really encourage people to check out the Houdini engine plugin for Unreal. They released a version 2 and it's awesome. Like the original one was good. It was a bit hacky. You kind of had to like know like what to name your material parameters and like how to name the material channel. Like you kind of had to do that, but now it's a lot better, where Houdini engine is just a lifesaver if you're working on any large project. Like if you're working on kind of small projects, it's kind of fun. You might get some value out of it, but chances are you're probably going to spend more time on it because you're in Houdini. But as soon as you start to like scale what you want to do with your projects, Houdini all of a sudden is just like your godsend. It just does everything you need it to do and more, right?
Yeah. So Houdini does have a free limited license, but I don't believe Houdini engine for Unreal works with
no. So yeah, there's Houdini Apprentice and Indie. So Apprentice is free. Indie is $100. And with Indie, actually, I don't know if you can export HDAs with Indie. Probably not. But you're kind of stuck paying for a license if you'd really like to dive into it. What I will say though is that before you go out and try to find like a cracked version of Houdini, if you want to like invest in your career in VFX or tech art, game design, whatever it is, like it's expensive, but it could be worth investment, and it could also be worth asking your boss, hey, like, will you buy me a license? I want to learn this. Even if you're not even, I don't know, find someone to pay for you. Like there's someone out there who's willing to pay you to learn Houdini. I would bet that.
For sure. Yeah. So I have this set up in the free version of Houdini, and I want so badly to bring it in Unreal so I can like finish what I'm trying to do. But if I can get it to work, it'll be like the best thing I've ever made in my life. Basically, it's a Houdini digital asset where I can give it any mesh in my scene, and it would procedurally convert it into Wildberry Pop-Tarts. So I could assign it any mesh, and I already have all the logic set up, so it'll like do all the like like triangulation and everything, and like make the
That
each
is not
surface
what I
have like the
expected.
bevel and like so all I need is to bring it into Unreal and then assign some dang materials to this thing, and I'm good to go. But I'm just this close.
That's incredible. That's actually that is not where I expected that to go at all.
If someone is listening to this and they make it instead, like I don't even want to be credited. I just want to see this come to fruition.
So top 3 Pop-Tart flavors then, like what do you got?
Oh, wild berry, strawberry, and cinnamon.
Okay.
Sure.
As long as strawberry and cinnamon were there, I was okay. I mean,
Oh, for sure.
Birthday cake.
what was the purple? Okay, anyways.
Yeah, there's a whole bunch. And I have not gotten to play in Houdini as much as I'd like to, but something that's a great starting point, I think, is for everyone who is very excited about the Matrix City sample. A lot of people don't realize that that is not a fixed city. It's not like all these incredible artists at Epic said, hey, we made a city, we're done. Almost all of that city is actually generated from Houdini. And not only is that true, but that entire Houdini project is available to use and modify, and you can create endless permutations of the freeways and the buildings and the way the traffic patterns work in that Matrix City sample, just through changing different parameters in Houdini. So if you do have access to Houdini, what a great sample project to get started with.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. I actually can't access those files because I only have a 1060 GPU on my personal, but they look awesome. And just knowing that like when it does work, it's extremely performant is incredible. And that kind of ties into something I did want to bring up too. Like a lot of people, when they're talking about getting into Unreal development or tech art, their biggest pushback from themselves is saying like, I really want to learn this stuff, but I just have like this laptop or I have this old computer. Like I don't have a 3060 GPU. I can't afford that. Neither can I. And I don't do that professionally. So keep in mind that with tech art, one of the biggest focuses is optimization. So if you're trying to optimize for your own lower end machine, you're going to have to pull out extra stops and you're going to have to get even more creative to make things work. So that can be a fun learning resource in that regard. Although I do wish I could open up those Matrix scenes and just go crazy.
Yeah,
that was a good point. That was 100% a good point. You can learn a lot from just troubleshooting why it's so slow. I mean,
yeah,
Have you guys played at all with RenderDoc? That's something I just
actually I was about to say, like, if you just stare at RenderDoc, you get smarter. Like
that's it.
Through osmosis. Yeah.
Just through osmosis. Like when I used to teach a course for Epic on optimization, and I'd open up RenderDoc and I would like get carried away, just like looking around RenderDoc, like, oh, check this out, like this is how GPU works, like look at this, like incredible. And then I'd waste 30 minutes to be like, oh shit, I got to teach the rest of this course. But yeah, RenderDoc is awesome and was a savior in the early days of like the Quest. Maybe Alex had this experience, but like the Quest was a black box when you first got it, and to develop for it was like almost impossible. And then they created a remote debugger with RenderDoc that was incredible. And I remember at Oculus Connect, I was talking to devs and they're like, yeah, we spent 3 months on an issue and we opened up RenderDoc and found that like the transparency was rendering in the wrong direction, and we fixed it in like a day and it was done. So open RenderDoc, get smart is my I don't know. That's maybe not good advice, but it is pretty cool.
Yeah.
And RenderDoc is free. That's not something you have to
yeah.
spend $5,000 on.
Right. Yeah, and the documentation has definitely come a really, really long way, especially in the last couple of years. But yeah, back in the day when Quest was new, it was like, oh, you're developing on Unreal? Well, do you know any other developers? Because maybe they have information.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, having resources in like Slack groups and Twitter and friends like Alex who have been doing some wacky things for a while definitely pays off. Yeah.
My claim to fame is I think I told Alex this recently. This is how much I care about this. Is I started the round of applause at Oculus Connect when they announced the link cable. I was the first one to clap. I started it, and you know what? That's really a point of pride for me.
Yeah.
Really good.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Do you guys think there will ever be another Oculus Connect, or is that done forever?
No, it's done.
That's too
It
bad.
definitely wouldn't be called Oculus Connect.
No,
That's for sure.
MetaQuest Facebook Connect or something.
Oh God.
No.
I bet they would make it a metaverse event, and it would be like a heavily sponsored, like it wouldn't even be like educational talks. It would be more about like, check out this cool product we made internally. Bye-bye.
The problem I've had is just like so many smart people I know went there and like worked on Horizons and worked on all their tech, and then Zuck shows up with his like Eiffel Tower that looks absolutely terrible, and you just gotta wonder like what's going on. They got like 5,000 people working on this. Like, I think everyone's expecting the rate of like development to just blow up as soon as you throw like that much manpower at it, and everything's gotten progressively worse as far as I can tell, because we don't have Oculus Connect, and I can no longer applaud at like feature releases. So
there are definitely a lot of really, really, really smart people over there working on stuff, just across tech. And it's really awesome to see. Yeah, and the stuff I've seen with like obviously the headset itself being like its own miniaturized product, an awesome computer I can put on my head and have 6 degree freedom, like that. It's an awesome product, and like it really does just work. And I can't say the same for any HTC product I've had as a headset. But yeah,
actually, let's talk. I'm going to segue this into a news item that I wanted to cover, and we are running late, so like.
Oh, it's okay. We're not running late. This can be.
I don't want to hold anyone hostage, but
3-part, yeah.
Yeah, this is like a 3-parter now, right? So I did want to talk about a piece of news, which was Epic announced that they created a partnership with Autodesk, and this was some pretty big news for a lot of folks. But I think I definitely want to get you guys' take. I don't know, Steve, did you see this news story?
I did. I have thoughts.
Okay, let's fire it then directly to you first. Like, what do you think about this? I mean, I think this is pretty huge.
What's the scuttlebutt? So I've been fortunate enough to have been working with Epic on Datasmith related stuff, like with those architecture courses. Same with you, Alex. Mm-hmm. For a long time, and like seeing it like be first released and that they made it like a free thing was just incredible. And being able to take a whole Revit file with 10,000 objects, stick it through Datasmith, and you have it in Unreal. Now it's like you just saved a lifetime of work by using this. Seeing more collaboration between Autodesk and Epic, like, hey, that's awesome. Like I can't bash that. I have nothing bad to say about that whatsoever. I'm not clear on what exactly this means, because I've seen the press release, I've seen like all these posts and everything, and it's saying there's a concerted effort to continue development and improve the process and workflow between Autodesk programs and Unreal using Datasmith. It's awesome, but what does it like mean? Is it like a financial thing, surely, or like?
I want to read you a quote here that blew my mind when I read it, which was, this is from the CEO of Autodesk, who said, "Epic is always going to be better than us at real time. We're always going to be better at deep design intelligence and what it takes to actually engineer a building or simulate a real building." That is a real statement in which a CEO both bashed their own engineers' abilities and encouraged their own engineers that they are the best at something else, right? Like, this just as far as I can tell, does not happen, right? Like you don't have two massive companies like this who decide, no, like that's their thing, this is our thing, like we can do this together, when both of them are so massive and are capable of doing so many things, right? Like Autodesk could have created a game engine if they wanted. Like they've been around longer than Epic.
Yeah, they did.
You remember Stingray?
Stingray, I was gonna
I
say,
don't.
rest in peace.
I don't
Yeah.
remember Stingray.
Yeah, imagine gosh, what would you say? Twin motion, but less functional. Well, yeah, I mean, like there's Enscape and stuff, right? Which
Well, yeah,
and for
Enscape,
architects is
but-
awesome, right? But yeah, Stingray.
What-
Stingray had.
Was Stingray the same as 3ds Max Live,
I
or was
don't
that
think so.
a different product? Okay.
I think that is a different product. Yeah.
All right. All right.
I remember the first time I discovered in 3ds Max that the first index of their arrays starts at 1, and I gave up on it right there on the spot. I said, I'm never working in this software.
Wow.
Yeah, I think this is encouraging to see, and you're totally right. Like, it's not often that you see two giant companies like publicly collaborate on something. Usually, it's like a quick acquisition, and then 6 months later we hear what it was for. But yeah, this is encouraging to hear. I'm excited to see where it goes, and anything that can help the workflows for architects, especially in visualization. Like, yeah, that's awesome. It's going to save a lot of people a lot of time.
Part of the reason I segued this from Metaverse is that I actually think that this is so I mean, for some context, GTC happened back in I don't know, a week ago, right? And NVIDIA has been talking about Omniverse for a while, and I think Omniverse is a interesting product. It has lots of features and it does a lot, and I think what this announcement showed me is that they're kind of maybe not the only game in town, in the sense that I think Epic and Autodesk is taking a inherently different approach to this problem, where it's more about like interoperability directly between them than necessarily some sort of centralized solution. And I think it's way too early to call like who's a winner and who's a loser, but you can see kind of the parallels that you could draw between the features that they're announcing here when it talks about, oh, we want to build bridges between AEC software and real time, and things like Twinmotion and Unreal Engine. So I'm pretty excited to see kind of where this goes, and one of the big headlines is like gateway to the Epic ecosystem, and I think to some extent this will be a pretty big gateway for people to kind of get on board the real-time train, so to speak, from industries that maybe they've heard of it but don't have a way of accessing it, for the same reason that like you haven't been able to like create your Pop-Tart project in Houdini because like I don't know, you don't want to pay $5,000. Like they just added Twinmotion for free for everyone who has an Autodesk subscription, right? Like that's going to make a big difference for a lot of people, I think.
Yeah, really exciting to see how it affects that industry. And they're both growing, and they both have made a lot of really good financial decisions in the past. So I'm sure there's going to be good results from it. I guess I'm just not very patient.
Yeah. What's your take on this, Alex?
I mean, a lot of what's already been said. I think free is great. So the Twinmotion thing was great news. I've always found it interesting how many members of Epic Games came from Autodesk, and without going into too many of their complaints about working at Autodesk, Epic Games is often considered a great company to work for a lot of reasons. And Autodesk sometimes gets held back by just being a very corporate company that is very, very focused on making shareholders happy. And you'll see a lot of product release cycles where not a lot changes from cycle to cycle. They'll move some buttons around and break some things, and that's 3ds Max 2022 or whatever.
I'm a strong proponent for Maya 2015.
Yes.
If I had Maya 2015, I could do anything.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyways.
So partnerships are great. Free things are great. I'm just curious to see what the actual impact will be. In the near term, I imagine this will allow a lot of people to take a look at Twinmotion who otherwise were using things like Lumion. So, you know, that's potentially exciting. We'll see.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good point. And I agree with what you said about Autodesk. It seems like every time they have one of those major releases, you're right. Like it's like the big features that I've seen have been like bug fixes or, you know, stuff that I'm not using, to be honest. I'm not a power user by any stretch, but it seems like they have a lot of technical debt. So yeah, any way that they can collaborate with other companies to improve workflows for both, yeah, sounds great.
Yeah.
All for it.
Very cool. Well, as we start to wrap up this very wonderful and deep dive of a podcast, we were thinking that it's a little fun every week to do just a little bit of a showcase or a highlight of something cool we saw on Twitter, LinkedIn, whatever. And I just realized, Steve, that the person I wanted to highlight also works at Framestore. I did not know that until this moment. I know Framestore is a big company, but do you know Camila Bianchi?
There are about 4,000 people at Framestore, Alex.
I know. I figured
do
it was
not.
it's like being like, hey, Alex, you're from Vermont. Do you know Fred Sam?
Hey,
whatever.
Hey, you're
Yeah.
a white guy.
Exactly right. Yeah. Although I do have a
not.
story sometime about what happened to me in Brooklyn, where I did know the one other white guy in the.
Well, I heard this story. This is a good story. This will be the cliffhanger, though. We'll save this for another one.
Good.
What were you gonna say, Steve?
I do not know her.
Okay. Well, I'll describe the audio of this, and I think I can actually share my screen for whoever has the video. I was caught by this video because Toy Story had such a big impact on me as a kid, and the idea that people animated these characters to feel so alive and lifelike. You know, I was 7 years old when that movie came out, and it blew my mind. And I think the control rig in Unreal Engine is an incredible tool that is still only being used at the tip of the iceberg of its potential. So I was really excited to see that Camila here created a course using Buzz Lightyear as an example with a custom control rig, and goes through how to rig and animate and set up a whole character just in Unreal Engine. No need for other software. So I'll put a link to this tweet and this course in our show notes, and that is my
Yeah, I think I gotta show off some of Ash's stuff now, since I mentioned him earlier. But I do want to actually pull up one of maybe I can share on my screen as well. Actually, I'm just gonna scroll down his Twitter, because honestly, this stuff is nuts. But I do want to share this for anyone who is watching, because I can also show his Twitter handle here real quick. Just there you are. I'm not going to try to pronounce that, but you can see, like, he's doing these crazy things with, oh yeah, this is like a classic example, but he's been doing this for so long, and look how incredible that stuff is.
You got to describe it, Jacob. Some people don't know what we're looking at.
Okay, fair. What we're looking at is an Unreal terrain that's been like carved pretty deep, and he has a water source that is running in real time. It's a particle simulation, and he's just getting incredible like white water effects. He has an effect where he's breaking this hole inside of a dam, and the water comes like flowing through it. Really, I can't recommend enough that you check out his Twitter. That's at VUTHRIC on Twitter. So definitely check that out.
Super cool.
All right. Well, Steve, I think we have one final question for you to
can I
shout us out on.
Shout out
please.
someone?
Yeah. Go ahead. Yes.
Yeah. So I definitely want to shout out Dylan Brown. So this dude has been doing some really awesome stuff where he's been taking old Unreal projects that have been free on the marketplace and giving them the old Unreal 5 Lumen and Nanite treatment.
Subway.
Yeah, and he's been doing stuff with like alembic fluid simulations made in Houdini that he then brings in for some, extra razzle dazzle. And just kind of going through like some of his stuff, he's done like some amazing fluid stuff, but like he was like updating like the Meerkat demo and
Updating the Meerkat. I want to see what a take is on Weta.
Meerkat. I think he added like rain effects to it. I'm not
that's
to
cool.
find it, but yeah, and like the kite demo, and he kind of talked about like optimization issues that were a part of that. The kite demo, if anyone isn't familiar, is about 6 years old now. It was a very, very heavy scene. If you try to open it, you'll be waiting for shaders to compile for a very long time, but it has a lot of big ol' 4K, I think some 8K assets in there. It's a huge project, looks phenomenal, and it was used for the announcement of Unreal going free that long ago. So yeah, it's really cool seeing someone like take old stuff that's free for everyone to take and use even now, and just update it and kind of show like what you can do with it.
Can you did you read out their handle?
Yeah, it is at DYLSERX. His name is Dylan Brown. Cool dude.
Yeah, and I don't think I said Camila's. It's KAMILA BIANCHI. Camila Bianchi.
Awesome. There are so many cool projects right now. I honestly, yeah, you just scroll through. You got to be on Unreal Engine Twitter, guys. If you're not on Unreal Engine, like if you haven't booked, there's like the little subject areas. If you hadn't added Unreal Engine, you have to, because it's the coolest stuff. Like you'll be both inspired and depressed at how good people are like how incredible people are working inside of Unreal just on their spare time. Like it's nuts.
Yeah, and some of these people, they just started using Unreal like a month ago, but they went on this crazy deep dive down like a single rabbit hole, and they are now the world's foremost expert on this like very particular fluid simulation or something. It's really cool.
Yeah, it's definitely been a great learning resource for me. And I'll just throw this out there: if anyone ever has any questions or tech art, or they want to like even talk about just like an informal mentorship, anything, like hit me up. I'm totally happy to talk. And, I got really lucky to get where I am, and I just want to pass that along to you too.
Yeah, you want to pay it forward. That's very kind of you, Steve.
And he's also authorized instructor. So
yes, I am.
You can hire him.
Yeah. All right. Alex, you want to throw at him the last question here?
Yeah. In the spirit of like Kent By Voices of VR, what's the ultimate potential of VR? I think Jacob and I want to try throwing out this idea of what does the future look like to you, Steve?
It's an open-ended question.
Yeah.
Oof. I think it looks exciting. I think when I think about the future, I think, outside of, professional application and what I'm currently doing, and traditional tech art for immersive applications, I'm thinking like, using technology and free programs to enable people to pursue careers they could never pursue previously. I'm thinking, like my kids getting into like software development in the future. I find that really exciting. And when I was a kid, watching Star Wars and like just being marveled and amazed by like all these amazing effects, and like I couldn't believe that it wasn't real, and now knowing like all of that is like well within reach is just like astounding for me. I see us becoming more interconnected and communities growing, and that would be a really awesome thing to see. Obviously, more diversity and inclusion, something that our industry is working on. I think that'll be really exciting as well. I'm very hopeful.
Well, thank you for coming on, Steve. This has been excellent.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, and with that, everyone, if you've listened to this point, you 100% have to like, subscribe, rate, whatever it is. because you just listened to an hour or more of us talk about Unreal Engine, which means you're dedicated, right?
Oh, hold on a second.
Oh,
Steve,
whoa.
where can people
Oh,
find you,
yeah.
Steve?
Oh, yeah, that's
I
probably
forgot to let him
important.
plug himself.
Yeah. I completely slipped my mind too. On Twitter, I'm at SBIEGUN1. I'm the first of my name. I'm gonna stick to it. Yeah, I'm primarily just on Twitter. I'm not like on Instagram or anything like that. But yeah, hit me up there. Always happy to chat.
Yeah. And we're always happy to hear feedback on the show. Obviously, first time we've had a host or a guest host with us. Very exciting. Please do hit Jacob and I up at our YouTube comment section. The email I think we have is uepodcast@gmail.com. Or no, we couldn't get that one. What is it, Jacob?
You can just info@uepodcast.com.
Yeah. Info@uepodcast.com. Thanks everyone for your time. Have a wonderful rest of your day.